No one looked up to see her, and she was pretty certain they wouldn't be able to see her, even if they did. As she tumbled forward, through folk sitting at tables, engrossed in their orbs, through the tables too, she cried out in vain. After what seemed the longest journey for such a short distance, Edith passed right through the solid oak doors, like a ghost, and out onto the cobbled street. It was evening, and the street was quieter now, but by no means empty. Folk ate street food and chatted. Some stalls were still open to lucky customers looking for a deal. Like a mournful spirit chasing its own corpse in the night, Edith meandered half-drunk with fear, barely in control of her fading body, passing through others all the way to Zoran's store. Her head swam with agonizing worries, fits of panic, and her own reassurances. "It will be all right. It will. It will." When she arrived, her heart plunged at the sight of the store's windows dark with inactivity. The evening had drawn in, and Zoran was certain to have shut up shop. The outsized orb, nestled on the roof, glowed like a wan pea-green moon. Surely that signalled he was inside, didn't it? Edith prayed it did. Forgetting her aeriform condition, she made to knock the door, but instead passed right through it. Wavering in the darkness, Edith fought to figure out up from down, left from right. Sucking in desperate deep breaths until her vision cleared, she checked her hands in front of her face again, but still couldn't see anything. She wanted the dark to be the reason for it. That way she could kid herself she wasn't vanishing at all. It was then, looking through her hands, she noticed the doorway at the back of the shop. It was closed, but the eerie green light of an Orbinall illustrated its edge clearly. She made towards the door, past motionless mechanotechnical spiderlings clustered here and there on the floor and on the web netting with their precious inactive Orbinalls. She passed through the solid wood door into a rather drab room, bathed in a creepy light, to find Zoran sat by the fireplace, eyes closed in a meditative state. There was no fire set there to cause that glow, but on closer inspection, as her eyes adjusted to the scene, Edith could see Zoran was wearing some kind of brass helm. It was from an orb atop this helm that the light issued strongest, casting grim shadows about the place. Edith found herself stepping closer, quietly confident Zoran wouldn't see her or hear her. She couldn't see her. "Edith," said Zoran, giving her the most principled fright of her life. Her heart clenched, and her lungs ceased working for all but a second, until she brought herself down from the rough-hewn rafters. Zoran's eyes remained closed. "I know you're there, Edith. I sensed what happened." You know? How?" Zoran opened his eyes and visibly adjusted his mind back into the room, as though stepping out of some deep, distinctly lucid dream. "You see this Orbinall conductor?" Edith assumed he meant the orb helm and nodded, then wondered if he could see her or just feel her presence. "Yes," she said at length, just in case he hadn't seen her nod. "It's connected to all the Orbinalls in the village of Ensum, through the one upon this very cottage, and beyond that to parts of Círdan so far flung. It would take you moon sweeps of travel to arrive there. Every mind is shared through thinkings, seeings, and sayings, Edith. So yes, I know." She shuffled closer. "How can this be?" Zoran raised his hands to his head and removed the brass helm. He shuddered, as if the disconnection was a dreadful wrench. "To explain such things would occupy more time than is suitable for such a late hour." He cast a gaze at the ground before he stood. Edith sensed that same lingering sorrow again, like someone trapped, perhaps. "But one thing I can tell you, Edith, is there is no going back." Zoran regarded her with pity in his gaze. He gently placed the helm on his chair and wandered to the far wall and took an orbinal from an inert spiderling clinging to that net, much like the one in the store front. He came towards Edith, the orb twisting in his hand as though it loved nothing more than to spin and waltz in his palm. It woke up, flickering to life like golden flame. "Here," he said, offering it to her. She took it and, with relief, sighed heavily as her hand solidified before her. The solidifying feeling crept up her arm until she felt the warmth of her body return, her heart beating, her lungs expanding and contracting. She was no longer a ghost. "Take care of that one," said Zoran. Gone was the silken feel to his speech. He sounded tired, lost almost. Edith began to search her apron for a spare piece of silver. They always found their way in there at some point, as she swapped from bar to kitchen all night. Zoran held up his hand. "No, there really is no need." "You're giving it to me for free?" said Edith, surprised at the sound of her own voice returning. Zoran laughed softly. "Nothing is ever truly free, dear Edith. Besides, you are still within your 12-moonsweep warranty." Before Edith could question what warranty meant, Zoran began to speak. "You have seen, as I once did in my town, the truth of the stranger in your midst, the bringer of the Orbinalls. I cannot allow you to return to the life to which you were accustomed." Edith stepped back, suddenly frightened for her life again. Obscenely she found herself wishing to be a ghost once more, to be able to escape through walls. She also wanted nothing more than to hurl the orb she held at Zoran's head, but she couldn't. She wanted it. No, she needed it. What had he done to her village, to the kind folk here and elsewhere? Conflicted, she clutched her orb tightly to her chest. "Please, I won't say nothing," she said, holding up her free hand, ready to stave off an attack. "No, I know." Zoran stepped back and away from her to some dark corner of the room. He stooped low to grab something veiled. With a whoosh of silk, he revealed another crystal orb the same size and dimension as that which presently nestled on his roof. Except this one was completely inert, having the appearance of a soap bubble. Edith marvelled at how light such an object appeared. It floated in his palm, despite looking as though it would require both arms to bear it. "I'm not in the business of murder, Edith Prattlebottom, so please be at ease. I am yet to finish this." He gestured to the orb. "However, as my predecessor, I have become quite skilled at crafting these orbs. This one is destined for my successor." His gaze met Edith's solidly. The oddest sensation of conflict arose in her. Her stomach fluttered. Hairs pricked up on her neck. She chewed her bottom lip. What did he mean by the way he was staring at her, with those eyes that conveyed more than his scant words? "I cannot depart this place, now that my orb is established. I have become rooted to this village, to the mines here. To leave, well, it would disconnect me, and that, my dear Edith, is as good as being deceased. I am more a prisoner to the thoughts and emotions conveyed by these orbs and the people connected to them than they are. Yet, for the chain, another link must be forged, Edith. It must. But it nourishes us, Edith, each one of us." "It has you, that thing. It has you," she said, considering it further. "You're not in control of it. It's in control of you." "As it is you," said Zoran. "This, however," he gestured to the inert, incomplete orb, "this is different, stronger. Its reach is far and wide. Not just this village."
"There are more places like Ensom is now?"
"Many. Many villages, towns and cities, Edith. Soon the whole of Seodan will be linked. Imagine not being part of all that. You have suffered the isolation. When you came to me, it was the fear of being deserted, left out in the cold, that conveyed you. She hung her head. Zoran was right. It had been an awful experience, something she never wanted to face ever again. That she knew deep, deep down. She beheld the inert orb in a fresh light. "But what about the hog's trotter?" she asked with a pang of remorse at the mere idea of abandoning it after all these sweep scores and so much hard work. The tavern was her life, the child she never had. She had invested so much work in it, and coupled with the powerful reach of the Orbinall, had become wealthy, although all that money seemed like sour fruit without the orb. Without that, she would have no fortune, and more importantly, no validation from others. She would cease to exist. "My dear Edith," Zoran chuckled softly. "That is all you are concerned about? Your tavern? Why, with the power of the Orbinall, you could open a hog's trotter in every village, town or city you pass through." She had never considered that. "More than one hog's trotter, eh?" "One after the other," confirmed Zoran.
"Like the links in a chain," said Edith, allowing the idea to percolate a little more.
"Exactly," exclaimed Zoran, clicking his fingers. There it was again, Edith noticed, that glimmer in his eyes, just like the first day he had come into the tavern. "However, I warn you. Listen well to these words. Choose wisely the location you wish to finally raise the Master Orb." Zoran gestured to the inert globe in his hands. "Once you have established the Master Orb, you will be forever fixed in that place."
"Unable to leave?"
Zoran nodded.
"You chose handsome. Why?"
asked Edith. Zoran smiled, a genuine smile, not a sly grin. "The place reminded me of home," he replied, with a hint of loss and longing. Edith mulled it over. Zoran's shop and his orbs, how successfully they had transformed Ensum.
"What is it I need to do?"
Zoran inhaled deeply, as if he had been relieved of some weighty burden. His eyes formed into half-moons, and, for the first time since she had encountered him, Edith suspected she had witnessed a genuine smile from the man. "And so, it is now as it was for my predecessor," said Zoran ceremoniously, as he turned from her to rest the orb back in its place under its veil. "The successor discovers themselves. Come, sit. Let us have some herbal tea. I suppose the hour isn't so late after all." Easing the great oak door open, Edith stepped within the tavern. It was coming on evening, and the place was full of locals. The air was thick with ale, pipe smoke, and the aroma of pies baking in the kitchen beyond. The chatter died down, chatter, no doubt, about her, and each and every one turned immediately to see for themselves the stranger who had arrived in their quiet fishing village. Edith smiled and bowed slightly, not as gracefully as Zoran talked, though it was enough. She was cautious not to dislodge the striking fascinator pinned to her voluptuously styled hair. "A tankard of your finest ale, please," she sang in a schooled accent and tone Zoran had assured her would be strange and alluring to the isolated people of Trey. She hitched up her delicate silken skirt and perched upon a bar stool within elbow resting on the bar, supped her ale, and took in a deep breath, whilst waiting for the first question. Who are you, outsider? Asked a stammering voice from behind a tankard of ale. Edith breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, ready to speak. The name is Edith, and I'm new in these here parts, and you have reckoned correctly. I've come to grant upon your village a proper delightful and spectacular gift.